Hello and welcome to ThePrint. I am Devdatta, and as we begin, let me take you back to 2023 when Iraqi activist Salwan Momika tore pages of the Quran, threw them on the floor, and stormed on them. He then opened a pack of bacon, put a slice on the book, and set it to fire, holding the book in his hands. His act, committed on the first day of Eid al-Adha in front of a mosque in the Swedish capital of Stockholm, which was in the immediate vicinity of the Turkish embassy, caused a storm. Turkish President Erdogan reacted immediately and threatened to block Sweden's accession to NATO. There were protests across countries in the Middle East. Earlier this week, the same Momika was shot dead a day before he was to be sentenced for his anti-Islamic activities in Sweden. On Wednesday, assailants entered his room while he was live streaming on TikTok and fired bullets. Though his killing was not captured on camera, a concerned viewer who heard gunshots alerted the police. The police later arrested 5 suspects. Swedish Prime Minister Kristersson held a press conference on Thursday confirming that security services were deeply involved in the investigation and also claimed that there may be possible foreign involvement in the killing. He said, and I quote, "I can guarantee that the security services are deeply involved because there is clearly a risk of connection to a foreign power." Now let me tell you how Salwan came to Sweden and stirred a storm that led to diplomatic fallouts and protests in 2023. 38-year-old Momika, who is an ethnic Assyrian originally from Iraq's Nineveh province, was a former member of Iraq's Christian militia, the Popular Mobilization Forces. He also fought against ISIS as part of a Christian militia and later became entangled in Iran's sectarian conflicts. In 2017, after fleeing Iraq following an internal power struggle within the Christian militia that he had founded, Momika sought asylum in Germany before eventually relocating to Sweden. In 2014, Momika had founded the Syriac Democratic Union and the Falcons of the Syriac Forces, which was an armed militia linked to the Christian Babylon Brigade, the military wing of the Babylon movement. In 2017, he became embroiled in a power struggle with Rayyan al-Kildani, a leader within the Babylon movement, which he ultimately lost, and as a result fled Iraq. It was also reported that Momika had ties with the Syriac Assembly Movement, which was a political party backed by the Kurdistan regional government. Now, he came in limelight in 2023 for organizing public Quran burnings in Sweden. He filmed these and shared them on social media. His burning of the Quran became a flashpoint in broader discussions about free speech, religious intolerance, and immigration. His Quran burnings also sparked violent protests across Middle East. A large crowd stormed the Swedish embassy in Baghdad, while Iraq expelled Sweden's ambassador, severed business ties, and revoked work permits for staff at Swedish telecommunications giant Ericsson. In the aftermath, he then lived under police protection for several months, while the Swedish government publicly condemned his actions as inflammatory. Momika then fled to Germany in 2017, where he publicly declared his atheism and renounced Christianity. In 2018, he applied for asylum in Sweden, where he was granted refugee status. By April 2021, he had received a 3-year temporary residence permit, which was set to expire in 2024. However, his application for permanent residency and the opportunity to obtain Swedish citizenship was denied after authorities discovered that he had lied on his asylum form. Now, he had falsely claimed his affiliation with the Imam Ali Brigades, asserting that he was only linked to its political wing, but he was in fact linked to the paramilitary faction. Now, in Sweden, he also gained some political attention after his meetings with Christian Democrat members of the Swedish parliament and their representatives. Momika later even expressed aspirations to run for parliament as a candidate for the Sweden Democrats. His stay in Sweden was quite eventful. Now, despite his residence permit, he continued to face scrutiny for his past connections to the pro-Iranian militia, and in 2023, the Swedish Migration Agency ruled that Salwan Momika should be expelled from the country. Now, here's a catch. Due to the threats against him in Iraq, the expulsion was not carried out, and instead he was granted a new temporary residence permit, which was valid until April 2024. In March 2024 that year, it was reported that he had left Sweden for Norway in an attempt to seek asylum. Later that month, Norwegian police revealed that he had actually been arrested on 28th March and that they intended to deport him back to Sweden under the Dublin regulations. He was subsequently transferred back to Sweden on 11th April. In 2023, this was when Sweden was at the center of a global controversy due to several Quran burnings, which is what Momika started. The act was collectively dubbed the Quran Crisis or the Quran Crisis and triggered widespread protests and condemnation, particularly from the Muslim world. What Momika's June Act did was set in motion a string of such desecrations which led to protests erupting in Iraq, Pakistan, and other Muslim majority countries. His call for a repeat in July led to the Swedish embassy in Baghdad being stormed by protesters and later being set on fire. After his burning incident, Stockholm police even reported receiving additional requests for permits to burn the Quran as well as the Torah and the Bible outside the Israeli embassy. These requests were eventually cancelled. However, his act led to protests in Denmark where the Quran was burned outside the embassies of Iraq, Egypt, and Turkey. This obviously led to violent protests, with some calling for boycotts of Swedish products and diplomatic ties being severed. There were counter-protests, calls for boycott, which eventually prompted Denmark and Sweden to reintroduce their blasphemy laws and make it a crime to disrespect religious texts. The Swedish government condemned these burnings, called them Islamophobic, and distanced itself from his actions, but it sparked a national debate over freedom of speech versus hate speech. Sweden, on its part, also accused Russian-backed disinformation campaigns of falsely claiming government support for the burnings in order to undermine Sweden's NATO bid. The Swedish police then filed preliminary hate crime charges against Momika, and the PM declared that Sweden was facing the most serious security situation since the Second World War. What happened in the aftermath of these burnings was that Muslim countries such as Afghanistan suspended Swedish aid operations, Iran's leadership called for the death penalty of Momika, and Iraq severed diplomatic and business ties with Sweden. Other countries such as Turkey, Pakistan, Jordan also condemned the act, called for boycotts and strong legal action. Even the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and the UN Human Rights Council called for measures to prevent such incidents, though they were not legally binding. The Pope intervened and even other world leaders expressed their disapproval over the burning. So much so that the Pakistani extremist group Lashkar-e-Jhangvi called for violence against Pakistani Christians in retaliation for the burning. Kuwait and Egypt followed suit. In response to these burnings, the Iranian militia, which was Ashab al-Kaf, even issued threats against Swedes, and on 16th of October 2023, 2 Swedish nationals were killed in Brussels by an Islamic State or IS sympathizer who targeted them as potential revenge for the Quran desecrations. Now here's when the controversy intensified. What happened was that far-right politician Rasmus Paludan also burned the Quran outside Turkey's embassy in Stockholm in January 2023, which led to Turkey suspending NATO talks completely with Sweden. Paludan, on his part, stated that he intended to demonstrate that there was still some freedom of speech in Sweden to Turkey. In response, Turkey summoned the Swedish ambassador to Ankara, warning the Swedish government against permitting the demonstration. Turkey even cancelled a planned visit by Sweden's defense minister that week, during which officials were set to discuss the ongoing NATO dispute. In 2024, Paludan was found guilty. He was the first person in Sweden to ever go on trial and the first to be sentenced for burning the Quran during an organized demonstration. Momika, on his part, was set to appear in court on Thursday for his verdict in the trial, where he faced charges of inciting ethnic hatred through his Quran burnings. His sentencing has now been postponed since he is dead. Following the killing, his co-defendant in the case, Salwan Najim, posted a message on Twitter and said, "I am next." He also asked, "Has the murder of Salwan Momika killed freedom of expression and human rights in Sweden and Europe?" Well, this is something that remains to be seen. For now, this is ThePrint. Keep watching for more such videos.